You ask me if I remember the sinking of the Titanic. Sir, I ask you, how could one ever forget? On the 10th of April 1912, I boarded the Titanic, the largest ship afloat in the world. She'd left Southampton and sailed via Cherbourg on her maiden voyage to New York City. I decided to join her a few days before. My father, Edward Bowker, who had lived with his two sisters in Chesterfield, had died following a somewhat protracted illness. I was devastated by his loss. I had been his carer and confidant in those last few difficult days. In an effort to get away from my grief and to fill my time, I decided to see if there was work on the Titanic. After all, I had worked on her sister ship, the Olympic, before, so I had the right experience and demeanour for the work. I was employed as a cashier in the a la carte restaurant alongside Mabel Martin and the waiters, most of whom I was to learn later were Italian. My father was laid to rest in Chesterfield on the 9th of April 1912. The day after, I joined Titanic for her maiden voyage. Her passengers were a mixture of the world's wealthiest, basking in the elegance of the first-class accommodations, to immigrants packed into steerage on their way to a better life in America. She was touted as the safest ship ever built. So safe she only carried 20 lifeboats, enough to provide accommodation for only half of her 2,200 passengers and crew. This discrepancy rested on the belief that the ship was unsinkable. Her lifeboats were necessary only to rescue survivors of other sinking ships, beside which lifeboats take up valuable deck space and ruin the ship's look. On Wednesday the 10th of April 1912, between 9:30 and 11:30 a.m, passengers boarded the ship at Southampton's White Star Dock. Shortly after 12 noon, RM FTitanic set sail on her maiden voyage to New York, with some 1,846 people on board, hundreds of whom were staff, ranging from deck crew to chefs, waiters to bellboys. As the liner departed, the huge amount of water she displaced almost caused a collision with SS New York, who broke free of her moorings and swung towards Titanic. The quick actions of a nearby tug who pulled her out of the way saved the day and allowed the liner's maiden journey to continue with just a small delay. At Cherbourg, her tender ships SS Nomadic and SS Traffic ferried out yet more passengers. I'd never seen a ship like her, even though I'd worked on Olympic. The White Star Line had certainly spared no expense, and first class on board Titanic was the ultimate in luxury. It included veranda cafes, a smoking room, a la carte restaurant, a dining saloon, a reading and writing room. She surpassed any other ship of her time. In my restaurant, guests dined on oysters, salmon, chicken, lamb, squab, and every kind of steak you can imagine. The dining room was the largest ever seen on a ship, at an impressive 114 feet long, filling the entire width of the ship. A live orchestra played background music as they dined in a room whose furniture and panelling was carved in fine detail into oak, mahogany, and sycamore. Now, when it came to resting, the first-class passengers on Titanic had 39 private suites to choose from, all located at the top of the ship. They had 2 large bedrooms, walk-in wardrobes, and a bathroom. There was also a spacious living room for guests. Suites cost up to £870. That's equivalent of $79,000. First-class passengers spent their days in sheer luxury, eating marvellous meals, taking tea, or taking the air on deck, where they played games such as shuffleboard, or whiled away the hours playing chess or backgammon. There was a gym, squash courts, Turkish baths, and even a swimming pool on board. I liked my job. Good people, good accommodation, and decent hours and wage. I felt like my life was back on track again, until the night of the 14th of April 1912, a night that will never be forgotten. It was a beautiful starlit night, and the sea was as calm as a lake, but the air was very cold. Everyone was in good spirits. Everything throughout the ship seemed to be going smoothly. It was about 20 to midnight. I was engaged in work in my office when I felt a slight shock. The shock of the collision was not nearly as great as one would expect, considering the force of the impact and the speed of the ship, which was going at about 22 knots, as I later found out. Then there was a curious grating noise. Going on deck, I noticed the engines were stopped and blowing off steam. Nobody knew what was happening, and so I went below to my cabin. On the way I met Mr. Andrews, the designer of the ship, who told me to get my lifebelt and go on deck. I asked whether anything serious had happened. Mr. Andrews replied, "Oh yes, she is going down." On my way through the ship, I saw my colleagues standing quietly and bravely on either side of the huge staircases, all equipped with the white, ghostly life preservers, always the thing one tries not to see, even when crossing on a ferry. I had mine on, but I helped some passengers into theirs, their faces pale with fear, each one strapped about with those white bars. After this, I joined everyone on board, who had rushed onto deck to see what was the matter. It was there we found out that the ship had struck an iceberg. There was a large quantity of ice and snow on the starboard side of the foredeck. I heard the boatswain call all hands on deck to uncover and turn all the boats out ready for lowering. It was clear to everyone on board that Titanic was indeed sinking. Every man went to his station, but there was no panic. Everyone was cool. And when the lifeboats were ready, the order was given: "Women and children first!" To the best of my knowledge, that order was carried out without any class distinction whatever. In some cases, they had to force women into the boats, as they would not leave their husbands. The men stood back to allow the women to pass, except in 1 or 2 cases where men tried to rush forwards, but they were very soon stopped. The heart-rent, awful goodbyes. The quiet look of hope in the brave men's eyes as the wives were put into the lifeboats. Nothing escaped one at this fearful moment. I was helped into lifeboat 6 at the front port side of the ship, along with Mabel from the restaurant. The boat was launched at the same time as lifeboat 3, I believe, around 12:55 a.m. Second Officer Lightoller ordered Quartermaster Robert Hitchens to command the boat, and also ordered Lookout Frederick Fleet to get in. While the boat was being lowered, Robert Hitchens called out, "I cannot manage this boat with only 1 seaman," resulting in Lightoller halting the lowering to find another seaman. With no other crew member appearing to be free, a first-class passenger, a Major Pochen, offered to go to help. After Major Pochen stated that he was a yachtsman, and Charles Lightoller agreed to let him come along board as he was sailor enough, he climbed down the falls and into the boat. As Major Pochen landed in the boat, his wallet fell out of his pocket and landed in the sea, where it remained for some 75 years. The boat, designed for 65 people, pulled away with just 23 on board. The passengers aboard our boat were mostly first-class women, the most famous of whom was the unsinkable Molly Brown, who said she was only in lifeboat 6 after a crew member suddenly grabbed her and dropped her 4 feet into the already lowering boat. The first touch of our lifeboat on that black sea came to me as a last goodbye to life. And so we put off, a tiny boat on a great sea, rowed away from what had been a safe home and job for 5 days. The officer gave us orders to keep rowing and to get away from the ship. We were exhausted, we were frightened, and so we kept on rowing and stopping and then rowing again. And then I heard some talk going on about the suction if the ship went down. It would take us with it. And so we rowed and we rowed. All about us was chaos. I saw an incident on deck as we pulled away. About 6 men tried to jump into a lifeboat before it had its complement of women and children, and the man in charge drove them back with the boat's tiller. Shortly afterwards, the 5th officer, Mr. Lowe, came and took charge of the boat. Drawing his revolver, he fired 2 shots between the boat and the ship's side. He fired those into the water as a warning to any further attempts of that sort. The first wish on the part of all in our lifeboat was to stay near the Titanic. We all felt so much safer near the ship. Surely such a vessel could not sink. I thought the danger must be exaggerated. We could all be taken aboard again. But surely the outline of that great, good ship was growing less. The bow of the boat was getting black. Light after light was disappearing, and now those rough seamen put to their oars and we were told to hunt under seats, any place, anywhere, for a lantern, a light of any kind. Every place was empty. There was no water, no stimulant of any kind, not even a biscuit, nothing to keep us alive had we drifted along. The ship sank shortly afterwards, I should say about 2:20 a.m, which would be about 2 hours and 40 minutes after she struck. The sight of that grand ship going down will never be forgotten. She slowly went down, bow first, with a slight list to starboard, until the water reached the bridge. Then she went quicker. When the third funnel had nearly disappeared, I heard 4 explosions, which I took to be the bursting of the boilers. The ship was right up on end then. Suddenly she broke in two, between the third and fourth funnel. The after part of the ship came down on the water in its normal position and seemed as if it was going to remain afloat. But it only remained a minute or two, and then it sank. The lights were burning right up till she broke in two. The cries from the poor souls struggling in the water sounded terrible in the stillness of the night. It seemed to go through you like a knife. During the night, after the sinking, our lifeboat 6, and other lifeboats drifted along. We were amongst hundreds of dead bodies floating in lifebelts. One man we saw was kneeling as if in prayer upon what appeared to be part of a staircase. He was only about 20 yards away from us, but it took us half an hour to push our boat through the wreckage and the bodies to get to him. And even then we could not get very close, so we put out an oar for him to get hold of and pulled him onto the boat. Sitting by me in the lifeboat were a mother and daughter. The mother had left her husband on the Titanic, and the daughter a father. And while we were near the other boats, these 2 stricken women would call out a name and ask, "Are you there?" "No," would come back the awful answer. But these brave women never lost courage. They forgot their own sorrow, telling me to sit close to them to keep warm. The life preservers helped to keep us warm too. I think they saved us from pneumonia, but the night was bitter cold, and it grew colder and colder. And just before dawn, the coldest, darkest hour of all, no help seemed possible. Molly Brown said we must row to keep warm, and so we did, through a sea of silence and death. The stars slowly disappeared, and in their place came the faint pink glow of another day. And then I heard, "A light, a ship!" I would not look. There was a bit of doubt, but I kept my eyes away. All night long I had heard, "A light!" Each time it proved to be one of the other lifeboats, someone lighting a piece of paper, anything they could find to burn, and now I would not believe. But as I looked up, I saw a ship bright with lights. Strong and steady she waited, and we were to be saved. We also saw as the sun rose to our horror that we were surrounded by icebergs, and essentially in a field of ice, some of which were some 16, even 20 miles long. But hope was here. SS Carpathia had heard Titanic's SOE wireless message and made speed as fast as she could. She had stopped right over where Titanic had gone down. When we got alongside, we were got aboard as soon as possible, about 6 a.m. The longest night of my life. And I was so weak with cold and exhaustion, it was my weakest moment ever. They lowered a rope swing, which was awkward to sit on when I had my life preserver around me. Then they hauled me up by the side of the boat. I just sat and wept tears of relief, of grief. We found some survivors had already been picked up. Everything was in readiness for us. Dry clothes, blankets, beds, hot coffee, spirits, everything to comfort us. The last of the survivors from the lifeboats were got aboard about 8:30 a.m. The dead bodies that were in some of the boats were taken aboard, and after identification were given a proper burial. We steamed about in the vicinity for a few hours in the hope of finding some more survivors, but we did not find any. During that time, wives were inquiring for husbands, sisters for brothers, children for their parents, and many a sad face told the result. I was later told my family were informed of my survival with 2 words: safe, Ruth. I survived, but I saw the whole thing, and I watched that tremendous ship quickly sink. I heard the terrible, terrible explosions and was surrounded by all the darkness that followed. Then the awful screams and cries of the 1,600 dear souls fighting for their lives in the water that one by one extinguished their lives. You ask me, sir, if I remember the night that Titanic sank. I will never, ever forget that awful night.